Now we will ask, is it possible to generate artificial consciousness? Some people have even asked, is it possible to generate artificial people who meditate or artificial Buddhas? But I will focus just on the issue of artificial consciousness. So if we ask, can we generate artificial consciousness? I think, and this is my answer, my conclusion, any answer to this question is not even false, let alone true. Why? Because it is either empty when consciousness is redefined in purely objective terms, namely in zombie-like terms, or it is meaningless for lack of an objective sign of subjective experience. So either you can generate something that look like the objective functions of consciousness, and therefore you don't have really generated consciousness in all its aspects, and especially not in its crucial aspect, or you don't know. You just don't know. You see a being which behaves as you, but you cannot know whether this being has experience or not. This is the problem. So to begin with, I would like to insist that there are uncertain convictions about artificial consciousness. Some people believe it's possible to generate artificial consciousness, but when they come to define what is artificial consciousness for them, what it would be to have an artificial conscious robot, then they hesitate. For instance, Stanislas Dehaene in 2018, he said that although consciousness is often considered the pinnacle of the brain and something that cannot be given to machines, I would like to advocate the opposite position. So even someone who is materialist may hesitate. Is consciousness produced by the brain, or can consciousness be produced by something else than the brain? Of course, you could say maybe it's neither. It's neither produced by the brain nor by something else, but this is not the question here. But then Dehaene says something that looks like a hesitation. We claim, he said, that a machine endowed with a function of synthesis and metacognition, namely the two elements of an objective definition of consciousness, would behave as if it were conscious. As if is the crucial word here. But are we not leaving aside the experiential component? Dehaene asked, are we not leaving aside experience itself? When we say that we generate a machine with synthesis and metacognition, does this machine have experience in addition to that or not? This is the question. But then in the very same article, the author says what follows. A machine capable of carrying out the functions of synthesis and metacognition would know that it sees something. It would suffer from hallucinations when its self-monitoring mechanisms failed. And it could have the experience of the same perceptual illusions as human beings. Here clearly the doubt about the fact that a machine endowed with the functions of synthesis and metacognition that are ascribed to consciousness would have an experience, this doubt is completely discarded, completely forgotten. And it is claimed that such a machine would have an experience. Okay? So the as if clause has disappeared from one sentence to another of the same paper. What should we do in order to posit the elements that we have to fabricate in order to fabricate consciousness? What is consciousness? What is this thing that has to be imitated by a robot? So there are 4 gestures to capture consciousness in the nets of an objective science and therefore in the nets of an objectivist technology that would yield a so-called conscious machine. First of all, we have to redefine consciousness by retaining only its objectifiable cognitive functions. And it's exactly what Graziano said in a paper of 2014 in the New York Times. How does the brain go beyond processing information to become subjectively aware of information? It doesn't become subjectively aware. It doesn't become subjectively aware, said Graziano. For there is no such thing as a subjective impression. There is only information in a data processing device. In this case, it's easy to produce a conscious machine. It's just necessary to produce a data processing device, mulling information, and that's it. You have got, in that case, a conscious machine. Second point, empty the vocabulary of cognitive science of its subjective connotations. Then, here again, you have to zombify it. Why? Because in order to get a machine that has understanding, thinking, emotion, fear, and so on, you have to be sure that you have an objectivist definition of these so-called emotions and be capable of reproducing these objective features into a machine. The third point that you need in order to capture consciousness in the net of an objective science and an objectivist technology is to suggest that we recognize that someone or something else is conscious only on the basis of an intellectual inference from behavior. And therefore, if you see a machine that has a behavior that is very close to ours, therefore you are inevitably arrive at the conclusion that this machine that has a behavior that is so similar to ours is conscious. And there is no other criterion. Since the criterion for deducing that a fellow human being is conscious is the same as deducing that a machine can be conscious, namely just external behavior, therefore you can get a machine that can be said conscious. Fourth necessity to get a technology of conscious machines, avoid raising the issue of the reason why conscious artifacts look desirable. Because after all, we could ask, why do we make so many efforts to fabricate conscious beings, since there are so many interesting conscious beings around us who are human beings? It can be to improve the efficiency of these robots by adding human-like functions, just making them more efficient, more useful to us. Second point, making robots substitutable for human beings in their social functions. Some people imagine, for instance, that robots can carry the functions that are normally carried by human beings, even in very difficult situations that necessitate care, compassion, and so on. And also, another motivation to make conscious artifacts is to make them substitutable for ourselves, as being for whom it feels like something to be, with a horizon of immortality of individual egos through an integral transfer of their minds into artifacts. This has been proposed also. Here you can see how far from Buddhism it is, from how far from the spirit of Buddhism this aim can be, because the aim here is to make the individual ego perennial, to make it immortal. This is not really something that is hoped for by a good Buddhist practitioner. What are the criteria for ascribing consciousness to a machine? Well, here again, you can say this machine can have an overt behavior analogous to that of conscious human beings. This is the so-called Turing test in a very demanding version. Also, these machines may have these machines may have cognitive properties analogous to those of human beings, properties that underlie behaviors but are richer because they hold responses to unexpected situations. So either it's sufficient for such a machine to have a behavior, an external behavior that is analogous to the human beings, or it needs to have a cognitive structure that is analogous to human beings. Third possibility is that a machine that can be said to be conscious must have, in addition, an internal architecture analogous to that of the brain of human beings, including the elements which are supposed to be substrates of consciousness. But we can ask which elements in the brain can be considered superfluous for that purpose. We have absolutely no idea. So achieving these three characteristics doesn't guarantee that the machines have a fourth characteristic, which is a condition for attributing characteristics. Experience, sentience, what it feels like to be a human or artificial being. Even if a machine has the same behavior as us, the same cognitive properties as us, the same internal architecture as our brains, we cannot be sure that we have implemented all the sufficient conditions to have an experience. So here there is a fundamental question asked for by specialists of cognitive science interested in artificial consciousness. How close to the human brain does a computer have to get before we can say it is probably conscious? So here you have an uncertainty about the degree of similarity between computers and human brains, and secondly, a doubt, because even if we have produced such a machine, we can only say that it is probably conscious, but we have no proof. Probably conscious in the full sense of the term, but we have no proof that it has subjective experience. But maybe we can bypass this issue of real consciousness, so to speak, and just ask an ethical question that perfectly fits with ethical Buddhism. How do we have to build a robot in order to feel at home with it? How can we feel at home with what was called a human caring robot? This question was raised by a Japanese team, and I don't think it's just by chance, because this Japanese team is sensitive to the ethical issue, not to the metaphysical issue. So, the irruption of robots in our lives is about to open a new era in our culture, an almost neo-animist era, in which we make less and less the difference between treating a being as conscious and attributing a true consciousness to it. So, probably in the next future, we'll have artifacts, robots, that we will treat almost as if they were human beings, and we will not even raise the question of whether they are really conscious or not, and we will say, oh, at any rate, it is a meaningless question. The essential point would be that these beings are sufficiently efficient to be treated as conscious by us, and to help us in all tasks, including human caring human beings. So why do we want conscious-like cognitive patterns in human caring robots? The answer of this team of Japanese authors is that because human caring robots need to be gentle like human beings. In addition, these robots need to be trusted by their patients and have a shared understanding of patients' life experiences. So even if understanding is taken here in the zombie sense, it's not a problem. The point is that the patients must have the feeling that these robots understand them, that they understand their illnesses and their treatments. These robots need to express competency as caring to naturally convey their nursing as healing to patients and their families. These robots should also have self-consciousness. Here again, it can be in a zombie sense. There is no problem for that use. So robots should also have self-consciousness and express their emotions without needing inducement by persons' behaviors. So if these robots have all these qualities, these are external qualities that look like a conscious being, then they are good for caring human beings. And that's enough. We don't have to care, so to speak, about whether they are really conscious or not, in the same sense of having real subjective experience or not. Okay? So the issue of artificial consciousness might be solved just by skipping the issue and just trying to make robots that are just as human-like as possible.